All right, so this Knife Thoughts video is going to be a review of this knife. And this is the new, coming out today that this video will be posted, Civivi Mini Praxis. So this is a smaller version of the Praxis, I'll give you a closer look later, that Civivi has had in their lineup for a long time. And Civivi did send this to me for review. So huge thank you to Civivi for that. And as always, make sure if you like videos on knives like this, you subscribe to the channel, click the bell, and select all so you know when I post new videos. Also check out my other social media. I'm on Instagram and Facebook at Knife Thoughts, and my website knifethoughts.com, where I post articles on knives like this and knife related topics. But Civivi sent this knife to me, and it was one that I was interested in because I like the full-size Praxis, but one of the big things that I like about the full-size Praxis is that it's one of the bigger folding knives in Civivi's lineup. So Civivi does a lot of EDC size knives in the 3-inch blade range, some a little smaller, some in the 3.25, but they don't do a whole lot in the 3.5 and above. Certainly they have recently expanded with the Synesis, like I did a review of recently that you can check out, but there's not as many. They lean more towards the smaller knives. So I typically like a little bit larger knife, and that's what really drew me to the original Civivi Praxis. So I was interested in this Mini Praxis because I wanted to see if it would be something that I enjoyed, even in this smaller size. Now, one of the reasons why I thought it might be is because if you watch my videos, you know that I like to say that a simple handle makes for an ergonomic handle. And if it's really well done, that's true kind of no matter the size. And I really like the handle on the original Praxis. I think it's a nice, simple handle. So I thought that I might, even though I have these kind of wide, thick hands, be able to, use the mini version and have it still be comfortable in use. So speaking of it being mini, let's take a look at the spec sheet that Civivi sent along. And there are two versions of this coming out. There's the one that I have, which is in black G10 and a satin finish. And interestingly, there is actually a difference in the hardness, it looks like, between the D2 on the satin finish and the D2 on the black wash finish. I'm not sure if that's accurate, but that is what the spec sheet says. And speaking of the other version of the Mini Praxis is like the version of the full-size Praxis that I have here. So it is a green G10 with a black stone-washed blade. So it gives you a good idea, at least aesthetically, what options you have here between my Mini Praxis and the normal size, what you might call a large Praxis. So those are the two different options that they're coming out with. And speaking of the size, you can see that it is under a 3-inch blade. And a lot of places there are blade length limits, and it's very often 3 inches. So I think that's probably a big driving factor in why Civivi came out with this version and why they typically do make seemingly more knives in that size range than in the larger size. So it is just under 3-inch blade length, closed length of 3.81, a blade thickness of 0.1, which is something that I really like that Civivi does, which they make their knives relatively thin bladed and really nicely ground so that they actually cut well. Not a super thick knife at 0.45 inches closed. And then 2.77 ounces, which is, a pretty reasonable weight for the size of the knife. Now the D2 steel is something that I like. I like D2 because I'm used to it. I've used D2 for a long time, and it's relatively straightforward to sharpen and holds an edge relatively well. And it's close to stainless. Now, D2 is not considered a stainless steel. I think it's like 0.5, something like that. Some small percentage too low of chromium for it to be considered stainless steel. So, you might want to watch if you cut like a lemon or steak or something with this, that if you leave the juice on the blade, it will probably patina a little bit. Not very much though, certainly not like something in a true carbon steel like 1095, like this GEC wood patina, but it's just something to be aware of, especially if you have never had a non-stainless bladed knife before. Now it is tip up, right hand carry only, which works for me because that's how I carry knives, but just be aware that that's the only option. It has caged ceramic ball bearings, so just like a lot of Civivis, very, very smooth, which I'll talk about more in a second. And it's a liner lock just like the full-size Praxis. Now here's one big thing that is another selling factor, I think, for this knife, along with it being, you know, legal in a lot of places. And that is that it is a really inexpensive knife. Civivi knives have never even really been in this range except for when they're on sale. And certainly now they have moved into being a little bit more expensive. The Praxis actually is one of the less expensive Civivis. It's on Amazon for $42.50. I actually think that there's actually a sale going on, which I wanted to mention earlier, on both Amazon and at Civivi authorized dealers for Black Friday, now through I believe Black Friday, maybe even later. I'll put the details in the comments, but there's a big sale going on, so the Praxis might be less than $42.50, but that's what I paid. Anyway, the Mini Praxis, you can see that the map, the minimum advertised pricing, is $29.75, so under $30. You don't really find a lot of knives, even, you know, knives made overseas, in that price range anymore. So very, very budget friendly as knives go in 2020, the end of 2022 here. And I think that's a big selling factor. You can get a really nice little knife for under $30. So there's the specs. And now I want to show you a few size comparisons. So, you know, you can say, oh, it's a 3-inch blade, have a good idea of how big it is, but it's always nice to see a couple direct comparisons. So as I have already kind of been doing, here is the full-size Praxis. So I'm going to lay these straight out so that you can see a little bit better. And the full-size Praxis, I believe, has a 3.75-inch blade. So you can see the difference there. The Mini Praxis is much shorter. It still has that nice tall blade, but it's definitely a lot shorter. Same handle shape, just smaller. One difference you'll notice here, the full-size Praxis has this lanyard hole. I wouldn't use that lanyard hole. It's kind of small, but the Mini Praxis does not, although it does have a little post right there that you could probably use to put a lanyard on, and maybe even more effectively, to be honest, than this hole here on the normal size Praxis. So that's a good comparison. Comparison to an EDC Classic, here's the Benchmade Griptilian. So this is the full-size Griptilian, but you can see that the Griptilian is a good bit bigger, longer. It's about a 3.5-inch blade. So you can see the difference there. And then something a little closer in size is a Spyderco Native 5. In fact, I would say very close in size. The blade is about the same length. You get about the same cutting length, maybe slightly more on the Native, but because of a not so much a 50-50 choil and just a straight up choil on the Mini Praxis, but they're very similar in size and honestly relatively similar in design too. I would say that they're not super close to the point where it's like obvious that there was an inspiration, but I wouldn't be surprised if there was an inspiration in the design of the Praxis from the Native. The thing with that though is that the full-size Praxis is quite a bit bigger than the Native 5. So it's interesting because the full-size Praxis came first, but if the Mini Praxis had come first, I would have thought that it was inspired by the Native 5. Just for my traditional knife crew, I know a lot of people that watch my videos are fans of traditional knives. I certainly am. Here is a Great Eastern Cutlery number 15, and you know the Mini Praxis is a good bit bigger. But I actually carried these two knives together quite a bit, and I think that they make a good pair because of the satin stainless or nickel silver. I guess not stainless, nickel silver and 1095. But basically the color scheme is very similar. So I did enjoy carrying these together. And then finally, a comparison that I think is a really good one, because if you're a fan of this knife, the Civivi Elementum, you'll probably be a fan of the Mini Praxis. Now, they definitely have a different design. One of the things I love about the Elementum is the nice simple handle, classic spear point, whereas I would call this maybe more of a drop point. Spear point and drop point can, be very similar. So a couple big differences. On the Elementum, you really don't have a choil. It's more of just a sharpening choil, rather than on the Mini Praxis, you can choke up on that, which I'll talk about. The other thing is there is probably slightly more edge, and I mean just slightly, on the Elementum versus the Mini Praxis. If you see them compared directly, there's just maybe a slight difference, but not a big difference at all. Now, the handles, you can see, are about the same length. So, maybe a slightly different edge to handle ratio. They have very similar features though. I mean, the Elementum does have this lanyard hole, which is maybe a little bit more usable than the one on the normal Praxis. The blade shapes, a little bit more straight edge on the Elementum, a little bit more of a continuous curve on the Mini Praxis. But overall, they're very similar knives. So I think the Mini Praxis is going to be just as practical as an EDC knife as the Elementum. And if it gains the massive popularity that the Elementum has, will just come down to people's aesthetic preferences. I think both are, equally well made, equally well designed, and both really good for EDC. But there is one thing, which I just mentioned a second ago, that I really like about the Mini Praxis, and that is that on the Mini Praxis, with the normal, the main grip area, my pinky finger kind of sits off the edge. You can see in this type of grip, I'm getting more of a 3, maybe 3 1/4 finger grip. And that's true also on the Elementum. You can see that I'm not really getting my full pinky finger on there. But because this Mini Praxis has a real usable choil, I can really easily get a full 4-finger grip on it with that choil, and it feels comfortable. I've used it. It doesn't feel like I'm going to cut my finger. Of course, don't slip your finger up onto the edge, but it does allow you on a much smaller knife to get a full 4-finger pinch grip, so you can get a little bit more control. So I do appreciate that. But even in this main grip, I didn't find any issue with it in use. Using it like this more often, and even like this, I didn't find any issue with having hot spots or anything like that on the handle. And as I mentioned earlier, the blade is ground nice and thin. I mean, very, very thinly ground to slice, like a lot of Civivi knives are. So it did cut really well. I cut a good bit of cardboard with this, breaking down cardboard. Now, I do find that I often prefer to put my own edge on these. I don't know, exactly why, but it seems like it cuts better and holds an edge a little bit more after I put an edge on. But that might just be my own experience and preference with the edge angle. So I did sharpen this, used it. I mean, you can see there's tape on it still from cutting boxes and stuff. And like other Civivis, it's very well put together. So you can see that it's drop closed when, I depress the liner lock, it drops, it has those ball bearings. Very, very easy to flip open. The detent is dialed in like other Civivi knives usually are. It came nice and centered. I did not adjust it at all. This is how it came from the factory, pretty much perfectly centered. No blade play when unlocked side to side, and none forward and back or side to side when locked. So pretty much what you expect from Civivi. They do a really nice job of building these knives. Now, it has the normal build, like on the normal size Praxis and the Elementum and all of their other knives, where the liners stick out from the covers a little bit and are kind of like rounded. So it's just something to be aware of. It's a little different than how some other knife companies do it. but I like it. I think that it's a nice way of finishing it when it is a relatively, well, not relatively, it's a very budget-friendly knife. They can finish it in a way that looks nice without it being super, super finely finished. So I like that style that Civivi has of making these knives, and they certainly do a good job. I have enjoyed carrying and using this knife. I appreciate Civivi, trusting me to make these reviews. And if you are looking for a smaller version of the Praxis, or maybe a version of the Elementum where you can get a little bit more of a full 4-finger grip, then I think this Mini Praxis is a great option, especially if you don't want to spend a whole lot of money, because it's about as budget friendly as it gets at this point. So again, thank you to Civivi for sending this. Thank you for watching it. If you have any comments or questions, please leave them below. I'm always interested to read them. I do read them all, even if I don't always reply to every single one, but I do definitely read them all. And like I mentioned at the beginning, make sure you subscribe, click the bell, and select all. And also check out my website and other social media. And last but not least, as always, don't forget to go out and do good.